The courtroom was dead silent except for the sound of a pen scratching across paper. Sarah sat at the long wooden table, her hand steady even though her heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces. Across from her, Michael leaned back in his chair with that familiar smirk plastered across his face, the one that used to make her laugh but now made her stomach turn. He slid the divorce papers toward her with 2 fingers, like she was something dirty he couldn't wait to be rid of. "You were nothing before me," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "And you'll be nothing after." The words hung in the air like poison. Sarah picked up the pen, her throat tight, and signed her name without looking up. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Not here. Not now. But then something shifted. The judge, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes, reached for a sealed manila envelope that had been sitting untouched on his desk. His expression changed as he read the name written across the front in elegant script. He cleared his throat, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Michael's lawyer straightened in his seat, confident, already counting money that wasn't his. But Sarah knew that envelope. She knew exactly what it was. And she knew that everything was about to change. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Sarah Mitchell had been raised in a world of quiet wealth and old money, the kind that didn't shout but whispered through mahogany libraries and summer homes in the Hamptons. Her father, Robert Mitchell, had built a real estate empire from the ground up, brick by brick, deal by deal. He was a man of few words but deep conviction, and he had taught Sarah that character mattered more than currency. So when she met Michael Hayes at a charity gala 7 years ago, she didn't see a man chasing her fortune. She saw someone charming, ambitious, full of dreams. He was a marketing executive with a sharp suit and sharper smile, and he made her laugh in a way no one else ever had. Her father had reservations from the start. He never said it outright, but Sarah could see it in the way his jaw tightened whenever Michael spoke about money, about investments, about the life they would build together. "Just be careful, sweetheart," her father had said the night before her wedding, his hand resting gently on hers. "Not everyone loves you for the right reasons." But Sarah was in love, and love, she believed, could grow where it was planted with care and patience. So she married Michael in a beautiful ceremony overlooking the Hudson River, and for a while, it was everything she'd hoped for. They traveled to Italy, bought a brownstone in Brooklyn, hosted dinner parties with friends who envied their picture-perfect life. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. Michael started working late more often, his phone buzzing at odd hours with messages he wouldn't let her see. He became obsessed with her father's business, asking too many questions about assets, portfolios, future plans. When Sarah suggested they start a family, he brushed it off, saying they needed to be more financially secure first, even though they lived in a $1 million home. The warmth between them cooled into something polite and distant. Then her father got sick. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, diagnosed too late to do anything but manage the pain. Sarah spent every day by his bedside, reading to him, holding his hand, listening to stories from his childhood she'd never heard before. Michael visited once, stayed for 20 minutes, and spent most of that time on his phone. 3 weeks before her father passed, he squeezed her hand and said, "You're stronger than you think, Sarah. And you're going to need that strength soon." She didn't understand what he meant until the funeral. Michael didn't cry. He didn't comfort her. He stood at the back of the church checking emails while Sarah sobbed into her mother's shoulder. And when the will was read a week later in her father's lawyer's office, Michael sat forward in his chair, eyes sharp, waiting. But the lawyer simply said that the full details of the estate would be disclosed at a later time, under conditions specified by her father. Michael's face darkened. That night, he told her he wanted a divorce. The divorce announcement came out of nowhere, at least to anyone watching from the outside. But Sarah had felt it coming like a storm gathering on the horizon. Michael sat her down one evening in their living room, the same room where they'd once danced to old jazz records, and told her flatly that he didn't love her anymore. "I think we've grown apart," he said, rehearsed and cold. "It's better if we end this now before it gets messy, eh?" Sarah stared at him, searching his face for any trace of the man she'd married, but he was gone, replaced by someone she didn't recognize. Is there someone else? She asked quietly. He hesitated, just for a second, and that hesitation told her everything. That's not what this is about, he said, but his eyes flickered away. The someone else turned out to be Jessica, a 28-year-old influencer he'd met at a corporate event. She had 1 million followers, a carefully curated Instagram feed full of green juices and yoga poses, and apparently no problem dating a married man. Within 2 weeks of asking for the divorce, Michael had moved into a luxury apartment in Manhattan and was posting photos with Jessica at rooftop bars and Michelin star restaurants. Sarah saw them online, smiling, toasting champagne, living the life he'd always wanted but never quite achieved on his own. Friends tried to comfort her, but their words felt hollow. Her mother urged her to fight, to hire the best lawyer, to take him for everything he had. But Sarah was exhausted. Grief from losing her father, betrayal from losing her husband, it was all too much. She just wanted it to be over. So when Michael's lawyer sent over the divorce papers, she agreed to mediation. No drawn-out court battle, no public scandal. Just a quiet dissolution of a marriage that had died long before the paperwork was filed. But Michael couldn't leave it at that. He needed to win, to have the last word, to prove that he had been the one in control all along. On the day they were supposed to finalize everything, he showed up to the courthouse in a designer suit, Jessica on his arm, grinning like he'd just closed the deal of his life. Sarah arrived alone, wearing a simple black dress and the silver pendant her father had given her on her 16th birthday. It was the only piece of jewelry she wore anymore. Michael's lawyer was a shark in a tailored skirt, the kind of attorney who smiled while she gutted you. She laid out their position clearly. Michael was entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage, including, she argued, Sarah's anticipated inheritance from her father's estate. My client contributed significantly to the household and supported Mrs. Hayes during her father's illness, the lawyer said smoothly. He deserves equitable distribution. It was a lie, and everyone in that room knew it, but the law didn't care about emotional truth. It cared about paperwork. Sarah's lawyer, a kind older man named Mr. Brennan who had worked with her father for years, simply nodded and said, "We'll let the judge decide." When they entered the courtroom, the air felt heavy, oppressive. Sarah took her seat, hands folded in her lap, trying to steady her breathing. Michael sat across from her, legs crossed, whispering something to Jessica that made her giggle. The judge entered, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His name was Judge Raymond Carter, and he had a reputation for being fair but firm. He reviewed the case file in silence for what felt like an eternity, then looked up at both parties. "This should be straightforward," he said. "Division of assets, no children, no shared property beyond the marital home." Michael's lawyer nodded eagerly. But then Judge Carter reached for a second envelope that had been placed on his desk that morning. It was cream-colored, expensive-looking, sealed with red wax. Sarah's heart skipped. She recognized her father's seal. The judge studied the envelope, then looked directly at Sarah. "Mrs. Hayes, I've been instructed by the estate of Robert Mitchell to open this document only in the event of divorce proceedings. Are you aware of its contents?" Sarah shook her head slowly. "No, Your Honor." Michael leaned forward, confused, his smirk faltering for the first time. Judge Carter broke the seal. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Judge Carter unfolded the document carefully, his eyes scanning the first few lines. His expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. Michael's lawyer glanced at her client, suddenly uncertain. Michael himself sat frozen, his confidence draining like water through a cracked glass. Sarah felt her pulse in her throat, each beat loud and insistent. She didn't know what her father had written, but she knew him well enough to trust that whatever it was deliberate. Robert Mitchell didn't do anything halfway. He had built his empire on strategy, on reading people, on anticipating moves 3 steps ahead. And he had seen through Michael from the very beginning. Sarah remembered the last real conversation she'd had with her father, 2 days before he slipped into unconsciousness. He had been frail, his once strong hands trembling as he held hers, but his mind was sharp. "I need you to promise me something," he'd said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is it, Dad?" "That you'll never settle for less than you deserve. Not in business. Not in love. Not in life. She had nodded, tears streaming down her face, not understanding that he wasn't just giving her advice. He was giving her a gift. Now sitting in that courtroom, she understood. Michael had always underestimated her. He saw her kindness as weakness, her loyalty as naivety. He thought she would roll over, sign the papers, let him walk away with half of everything her family had built over generations. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. But he had forgotten one crucial detail. He wasn't dealing with Sarah alone. He was dealing with the legacy of a man who had spent his entire life outthinking people like him. Judge Carter cleared his throat, and the sound snapped everyone back to attention. This document, he began slowly, is a codicil to the last will and testament of Robert Mitchell, specifically triggered by the event of his daughter's divorce. Michael's face went pale. His lawyer's pen froze mid-note. It states, Judge Carter continued, that in the event Sarah Mitchell Hayes is divorced, the entirety of Robert Mitchell's estate, including all properties, investments, trusts, and liquid assets, shall be transferred solely to her, with no claim available to her former spouse. The words landed like a bomb. Michael's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His lawyer started to object, but Judge Carter held up a hand. I'm not finished. The room held its breath. Furthermore, the judge read, his voice steady and deliberate. If evidence is presented that Sarah's spouse initiated the divorce or engaged in behavior including but not limited to infidelity, emotional cruelty, or financial manipulation, an additional punitive trust of $5 million shall be established in Sarah's name, drawn from a separate fund set aside specifically for this purpose. Michael shot to his feet. That's insane. He can't do that. Judge Carter looked at him over his glasses, unmoved. Sit down, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Mitchell was well within his rights to structure his estate however he saw fit. This document was reviewed and notarized by 3 independent attorneys. It is legally binding. Michael sank back into his chair, his face a mask of shock and fury. Jessica, sitting behind him, looked confused, her phone still in her hand mid-Instagram story. Sarah felt something crack open inside her chest. Not relief, not joy, but something quieter. Vindication. Her father had known. He had known all along. And he had protected her even after he was gone. The courtroom erupted. Michael's lawyer was on her feet, objecting, arguing, but her voice was drowned out by the chaos. Michael himself looked like he'd been hit by a truck, his face red, his hands shaking. Sarah sat perfectly still, her father's pendant resting against her heart, and for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. Judge Carter banged his gavel 3 times, restoring order. This court recognizes the validity of Robert Mitchell's codicil. Mr. Hayes, you are entitled to nothing from this marriage beyond what you brought into it, which according to these financial records, was approximately $43,000 in personal assets and $67,000 in debt. Michael looked like he might be sick. The gavel came down one final time. This divorce is granted. Mrs. Hayes, you are free to go. Sarah stood slowly, her legs unsteady, and walked out of that courtroom into the late afternoon sunlight. Behind her, she could hear Michael shouting, his voice cracking, but she didn't turn around. She didn't need to. It was over. The days following the court decision felt surreal, like Sarah was living in someone else's life. News of the verdict spread quickly, not because Sarah wanted it to, but because Michael couldn't keep his mouth shut. He went on social media, posting angry rants about gold diggers and corrupt judges, conveniently leaving out the part where he'd mocked his grieving wife in open court. The posts were deleted within hours, likely by his lawyer, but the damage was done. Screenshots lived forever. Shazza, stay up for line. She spent the first week at her mother's house in Connecticut, sitting in the same garden where she'd played as a child, trying to process everything that had happened. Her mother, Margaret, a woman of grace and quiet strength, didn't say much. She just made tea, sat beside her daughter, and let her feel whatever she needed to feel. Your father would be proud, Margaret said one evening as they watched the sunset. He always said you had a spine of steel. You just needed a reason to show it. Sarah smiled faintly. I didn't do anything. He did. No. Margaret corrected gently. He gave you the tools. You walked through that courtroom with your head held high. That was all you. It was true. Sarah had spent so many years trying to be the perfect wife, the accommodating partner, the woman who didn't make waves. She'd convinced herself that love meant sacrifice, that keeping peace meant swallowing pain. But her father's final gift hadn't just been money. It had been permission to stop shrinking herself for someone who didn't deserve her in the first place. The inheritance itself was staggering. Robert Mitchell's estate was worth over $200 million, built through decades of smart investments, real estate holdings, and a network of businesses that spanned 3 states. Sarah had known her family was wealthy, but she'd never fully understood the scope of it until the lawyers walked her through every account, every property, every trust. She could have lived 10 lifetimes without working another day. But that wasn't who she was. Her father hadn't raised her to be idle. Within a month, Sarah established the Robert Mitchell Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping women escape abusive marriages, covering legal fees, housing, therapy, whatever they needed. She donated $2 million to kickstart it, and within weeks, applications poured in from women all over the country. Women like her, who had stayed too long, loved too hard, believed too much. She read their stories late into the night, tears streaming down her face, and she understood that her father's legacy wasn't just money. It was protection. It was justice. It was love in its most fierce and unyielding form. Michael, meanwhile, had fallen apart. The luxury apartment? Gone, couldn't afford it. The designer suits? Sold online. Jessica? She'd left him 2 weeks after the court decision, moving on to a tech entrepreneur with a verified Twitter account and a yacht. He tried to appeal the judge's ruling, but his lawyer quit after he couldn't pay her retainer. He tried to contact Sarah, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to furious to desperately pleading. She never listened to them. Mr. Brennan handled all communication, and his instructions were clear. No contact. Ever. One evening, about 6 weeks after the divorce, Sarah was leaving a restaurant in the city when she saw him. Michael was standing on the corner, waiting for the subway, hands shoved in the pockets of a worn jacket she didn't recognize. He looked older, smaller, like someone had let the air out of him. For a moment, their eyes met. She saw recognition flash across his face, followed by shame. He opened his mouth like he might say something. But Sarah turned and walked to her car without a word. There was nothing left to say. He had made his choices. Now he had to live with them. As she drove home that night, the city lights blurring past her window, Sarah thought about the woman she used to be. The one who would have forgiven him, who would have believed his apologies, who would have taken him back because she was too kind to let someone suffer, even if they deserved it. That woman was gone. And Sarah didn't miss her. A year later, Sarah stood in the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, surrounded by 300 people who had gathered for the annual Robert Mitchell Foundation Gala. She wore a midnight blue gown that her mother had helped her pick out, simple and elegant, nothing flashy. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. The foundation had grown beyond her wildest expectations. They'd helped over 800 women in the first year alone, providing legal support, safe housing, job training, and counseling. Sarah had hired a full team to run day-to-day operations, but she stayed involved, reading every letter, meeting with beneficiaries when she could, making sure that no woman who reached out for help was turned away. Tonight's gala had raised over $4 million, and as Sarah took the stage to give her speech, she felt her father's presence so strongly it almost took her breath away. She could picture him in the back of the room, arms crossed, that subtle proud smile he used to give her when she didn't think anyone was watching. "Thank you all for being here," Sarah began, her voice steady. "A year ago, I was sitting in a courtroom wondering how my life had fallen apart so completely. I'd lost my father. My marriage was ending. I felt like I'd failed at everything that mattered." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Some she knew, some she didn't, but all of them were listening. "But my father taught me something I didn't fully understand until recently. He taught me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up, dusting yourself off, and deciding that your story doesn't end just because someone else tried to write the ending for you." The room was silent, hanging on every word. "This foundation exists because my father believed that people, especially women, deserve protection, dignity, and a second chance. He believed that no one should have to stay in a situation that diminishes them, whether that's a marriage, a job, or any relationship that makes them feel less than they are. Her voice cracked slightly, and she took a breath. So this work, this foundation, this community we're building together, it's not just about money. It's about saying to every woman out there who feels trapped, who feels powerless, who feels like she has nowhere to go, we see you. We believe you. And we will stand with you. The applause was thunderous. People rose to their feet, and Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but this time they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of purpose, of healing, of knowing that something good had come from something broken. After the gala, Sarah drove to the cemetery where her father was buried. It was late, nearly midnight, but she didn't care. She walked through the quiet rows of headstones until she found his. A simple granite marker with his name, his dates, and a single line he'd chosen himself. He built with integrity, loved with devotion, and left the world better than he found it. Sarah knelt down, placing a single white rose on the grave. "I hope I'm making you proud, Dad," she whispered. "I hope you know that what you did, it saved me. Not just financially, but in every way that matters. You saw what I couldn't see. You protected me even when I didn't know I needed protecting." She sat there for a long time, the cool night air brushing against her skin, the distant sound of the city humming in the background. And for the first time since her father's death, she felt peace, not the absence of pain, but something deeper, the quiet confidence that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Michael had been a chapter in her story, but he wasn't the story itself. He was a lesson, a painful but necessary one, about knowing her worth, about not settling, about understanding that love should never cost you your dignity. And as Sarah stood to leave, she looked up at the stars scattered across the dark sky and smiled. Her father had given her many things: a fortune, a foundation, a future. But the greatest gift of all was the one he'd given her in that courtroom. The gift of knowing that she had never been nothing. She had always been everything. And no one, not Michael, not anyone, could ever take that away from her. So let me ask you something. If you were in Sarah's position, how would you have handled it? Would you have forgiven Michael? Would you have fought back? Or would you have walked away quietly and let time do the work? And what about her father? Do you think he did the right thing by setting up that codicil? Or should Sarah have been allowed to make her own choices without his interference? I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that you're stronger than you think, hit that subscribe button. Because next time, we're telling the story of a woman who showed up to her ex-husband's funeral, only to hear a heartbeat coming from inside the casket. You won't want to miss that one. Until then, remember, your worth is not determined by the people who leave. It's determined by how you rise after they're gone. Thank you for watching.